Okay. Cooks versus cons. This is a show. The premise is you take two professionally trained chefs who make their living as chefs, and they're competing against two amateurs who have reasonable skills in cooking, and the judges have to figure out who's the chef and who's not the chef, and then they judge whose food is better than others. If you're not a professionally trained chef, meaning going to the Culinary Institute of America or Cordon Bleu, if you're not one of those, a guy like me, you win $15,000. Okay, if one of the professional chefs wins, they win $10,000. It's a one-off show. Unlike Chopped, which is another competitive cooking show where people compete, Chopped has multiple episodes. So you keep on moving along. So it's like 3 or 4 episodes till you actually win. You have to keep cooking different things. Chopped is one-off. One episode, and then you're off and you don't come back, whether you win or not. So it's one of the few shows that actually amateurs get to compete, and certainly the only show where amateurs compete against professionals. So why did I get on it? How could I have gotten on it? Well, I do actually cook a lot, or at least in the past I cooked a great deal. This is an article in the Times, the Post Standard. Can an SU geology professor convince TV judges he's a pro chef? Tune into the Food Network. So how did I get onto it? Say what? I mean, what the hell is this all about? Well, a little backstory. What you're looking at is a dining room. I think this is my synagogue or another synagogue, where the plates are set for 200 people for a 10-course Chinese dinner. So I used to do these routinely, once a year, several times a year, dinners for 10, 12, 15, 20 people as fundraisers. I can do most anything Chinese. These are vegetarian plates for one such of a dinner. These are Peking duck. We did Peking duck once, which was really difficult because we didn't have ovens that can do Peking duck like the Asian market. But we did it anyway. And some other things at private banquets. Those are chicken wings, and those are shrimp balls, and those are dumplings, and that's a stir-fried something, and that's a fish. So I've done a lot of Chinese cooking. Out of all the catering I was doing for goods and services, I was asked to do a cookbook. So I produced a niche cookbook called From Luxion to Lo Mein, The Jewish Love Affair with Chinese Food. And this is every decade since 1950, there was a kosher Chinese cookbook produced, one a decade. And the last one was in 1990. So when I got to the 2000s, I thought, well, the market's still there. And so I promoted it with publishers, and it took a long time until I actually got a real publisher with real reviewers, real editors. Took a long process, and then this came out, and it actually did quite well for this little tiny niche market. With respect to the kosher, I took traditional Chinese food and simply swapped out the protein to make it kosher. So instead of shrimp and asparagus stir-fried, it would be, I adapted it using snapper strips, the fish snapper, stir-fried. Instead of dishes with pork, I'd substitute veal or dark meat chicken. So it's easy to make the substitution and still get as a pretty traditionally or authentic dish. And this was reviewed in the New York Times. Didn't pick it up, but NPR did. So I got an NPR around Christmas time, the connection with Jews eating Chinese at Christmas, and so forth. And I got on, it was a nice, it was fun. I did a full book tour around the country. Took a sabbatical to do it. I lied to my university. I said I was going to do something else. And then I cooked literally across the country, from New Jersey to San Diego, from San Antonio to northern Michigan. And every place I went, as part of the deal, I'd cook a lunch for 50 people with 4 courses. I went to places where they had kitchens. So which was completely nuts, by the way. No cookbook author ever volunteers to do that. And I could write a book about the stories of going into a strange kitchen with strange volunteers, trying to, in one case, cook this with a penknife and 1 saucepan, But out of all that came something that was really interesting. I was invited by the Sichuan Higher Institute of Cuisine in Chengdu, China, to go and do an Iron Chef competition against their head chef. Now, how did that happen? So we got to see what their kitchens look like. This is the Culinary Institute of China. And so there's me with budding chefs. Okay, there's a picture of Betty on the left there. They wanted to talk with her because she's a really good baker, and they're trying to bake Western stuff and wanted her to taste it. That's her tasting what looked like a beautiful French pastry with a lacework on it that you normally have like fruit in it. This had ham and cream peas, you know. And Betty is a fairly observant Jew, but she realizes you have to kind of roll with the punches there. So anyway, this is the theater with two massive woks with jet burners under them that I was going to compete. And that's an Iron Chef competition, like with the head chef of this institute. Now, the reason I got in there is I was preparing to take students across China along the Yangtze River. And as part of it, I was doing prep work, seeing where I could take them to. And they got wind of this scientist who published the Chinese cookbook. And they said, that was so strange, they couldn't imagine that. And they wanted to see what my chops were. So I went to this competition, and that's me cooking madly with the sous chef. That's the Iron Chef of that institute, and he wasn't very happy watching me cook, as you can see. These were the dishes. This was one of my dishes here, and that was the other. What this is a fricassee in the style of my mother would make. All right, a Jewish dish, but I made it into a Sichuan style using different spices. And this was going to be gefilte fish, which is a pate of fish, but for reasons I won't go into here, I had to morph it into fish balls that were deep fried. And what he made was something called three times cooked pork over here. That was simply an unbelievable dish. And he won, of course. But at the end, he thought I did okay. When I asked him, give me an honest critique, don't worry about saving face for me. How'd I do? He said, you would have passed the course. And it was really, I felt pretty good. So, that's all that. Well, how did I get on TV? Enter the Dragon. That's my daughter, Hannah. And I call her a dragon because she got me into this thing. I hadn't thought about doing this. And she said, look, you got the cookbook, you cooked at the Sichuan Institute of Culinary Arts. Why don't you apply to be on Cooks vs. Con? What's the harm? You got some creds. And so I said, why not? So I did. And so what were the steps? It starts with submittal of a proposal. You go online, and it's an extensive written proposal where you have to demonstrate, how long have you cooked? What do you like to cook? What's your experience in front of television? Have you ever talked in front of people? On and on and on. Okay? Then you get a call, and they say, we would like to interview you. We've seen what you sent us. We'd like a telephone interview. So an hour telephone interview. And you're talking with a producer who's then asking a whole series of questions, many of them similar to what you put on the form. Then another producer calls you for another oral interview. And then a week after that, if they like you, they say, we want a third interview, but this time using Skype or FaceTime, where they can see you. And they say, we want you to prepare a dish and plate it for us, anything you want. We want to see how you plate food, and we want you to cut an onion in front of us, okay, with a knife. All right, and so this was the practical test. All right, then you get through that. You go to pre-production before the show. Then there's the production, which is the actual competition. Then post-production and more post-production after that. So this was a long process. It was a long process. So, and you go through casting. So you'd think that, okay, you apply to the Food Channel, but no, there's an actual casting company that does the casting. And they then propose candidates to the Food Network. So just as if I were applying to be on any television show, you go through a casting process, and they find the people who are going to do the acting, say. So it was basically TV Hollywood in every way it is. So the phone interview 1, phone interview 2, Skype, same questions, and then show a plated meal and chop an onion. So, this is what they're looking for, those of you who cook. If you chop an onion this way, you don't get on the show. Okay? Because you do not put your finger up here, and you do not do this. If you chop an onion like that, it means you've learned enough about cooking that you can very quickly get your way through vegetables. And you won't cut your finger. This is no, this is right. And that's what we're looking for. And if I had done that, I would have never gotten on the show. And they sometimes ask other skills. So notice where the fingers are. That's a no-no. Okay, one of the questions they asked, if chosen to compete, why would I think I might win? And I said, well, if I can fool 10,000 students, I'm a scientist. I can fool 3 judges, I'm a chef. And there's one of those students that I had to teach, you know. And they thought that was a really clever response. So it's a very tight vetting because they don't want anybody up there who will give away that they're an amateur right away. Because then they lose all their entertainment value.